In 2019, Canadian researchers asked a simple question: what are the biggest health problems facing the country? The answers were almost unanimous: obesity, inactivity, chronic disease. Across political lines, everyone agreed. But the moment the conversation turned to solutions, the consensus vanished. People on the political right instinctively leaned toward personal responsibility, in that individuals should change their behavior. Those on the left immediately looked to systemic interventions, things like government programs, regulations, and subsidies. Same problem, same data, two completely different reactions. What happened in that split second between agreeing on the problem and disagreeing on the solution tells us something crucial about how we think and how identity can hijack our health decisions before we've even had time to blink. Today, we're going to unpack that moment. We'll look at the Canadian study in detail, explore the psychology behind fast and slow thinking, and see how centuries-old practices of discernment can give us a way through the noise. This isn't just about politics, it's about how we make health choices every single day. Let's start by digging into the study itself, because the data here is fascinating. In 2019, researchers in Canada conducted a national survey to understand how people across the political spectrum view different health problems and their potential solutions. The sample included more than 9,000 adults, spread across all provinces, with a careful balance of age, gender, education level, and political identity. Respondents were asked to evaluate a series of health issues that most Canadians agree are pressing, things like rising rates of obesity, preventable chronic disease, and strain on the healthcare system. Here's where it gets interesting. While almost everyone agreed on the problems, the moment the researchers presented possible solutions, the responses split sharply. The researchers offered two broad types of solutions. First, personal responsibility solutions, things like encouraging healthier diets, increasing physical activity, or providing education on lifestyle habits. Second, systemic or policy-based interventions. For example, regulating food advertising to children, increasing taxes on sugary drinks, subsidizing healthier foods, or redesigning urban spaces to support movement. Each respondent rated how appropriate they thought each solution was, and the patterns that emerged were striking. When the data was analyzed by political identity, a clear divide appeared. Those who identified as conservative overwhelmingly favored personal responsibility approaches. They supported educational campaigns, lifestyle interventions, and individual behavior change. But they were skeptical of systemic solutions, especially those involving regulation or taxation. On the other hand, those who identified as progressive or left-leaning strongly supported policy interventions, seeing regulation, subsidies, and structural changes as essential to solving population-level health problems. Personal responsibility measures were seen as helpful, but often insufficient on their own. But the most compelling part of this study wasn't just the overall difference, it was the extremes. At the far ends of the political spectrum, responses became mirror images of each other. Among the most conservative respondents, support for systemic interventions almost disappeared. Meanwhile, among the most progressive, support for personal responsibility measures dropped significantly, even for solutions most public health experts would consider non-controversial, like nutrition education in schools. In other words, the exact same solutions were interpreted through completely different lenses, depending on the group's political identity. This polarization happened despite shared recognition of the problems. Almost everyone agreed obesity rates are too high. Everyone saw the strain on the healthcare system. But when asked, what should we do about it, political identity became the deciding factor. That's the core finding of this survey, and it sets the stage perfectly for where we're going next. Because when people interpret solutions so differently, despite seeing the same data, something deeper is at work. And to understand that, we need to talk about how we think. When we look at the split we just saw, people agreeing on the problem and diverging on the solutions, the question becomes, how does that happen so fast? The short answer is this: our minds work on two speeds. Daniel Kahneman described them as two systems, and once you see how they operate, you'll notice them everywhere. System 1 is the quick lane. It's the part of your mind that recognizes faces, feels a gut response to a headline, and gives you a confident yes or no almost before you're aware of thinking. It's fast, it's associative, and it's shaped by emotion, memory, and social cues. When you see a policy framed in a way that matches your identity, System 1 hands you certainty. You like it or you don't, and that certainty feels real. System 2 is the slow lane. It is deliberate, effortful, and analytical. System 2 reads studies, weighs trade-offs, notices long-term consequences, and tolerates complexity. It's the part that resists easy answers and asks the uncomfortable follow-ups. Who benefits from this policy? Where's the evidence? How would this play out in practice? Here's the key. System 1 is not a mistake. It speeds us through millions of choices a day. The problem is when System 1 is driving decisions that actually require System 2, like complex health policies, or even personal health choices with real trade-offs. That dynamic is exactly what happened in the Canadian survey we examined earlier. The study showed people across the political spectrum agreeing on the same health problems, but when solutions were introduced, System 1 responses, identity-shaped, immediate, emotionally saturated, dominated how people evaluated those solutions. Think about a sugar tax as a concrete example. When the measure is framed as government will tax what you buy, System 1 for many people triggers an immediate reaction. It feels like intrusion or punishment or fairness, depending on the listener's values. That instant reaction drives a quick rejection or support. If we invite System 2 into the conversation, the questions shift. How much would a tax reduce consumption? How would revenue be used? What are the measurable health impacts over 5 or 10 years? Those questions require time, data, and trade-off thinking. Another way to see the split is with the effect heuristic. We judge risk and benefit not by checking all the evidence, but often by the feelings something evokes. A program framed as personal responsibility warms the neural circuits that value autonomy, and people instinctively favor it. A program framed as government intervention cues concerns about control, and people instinctively resist. The feeling substitutes for the hard analysis. There are predictable cognitive traps that occur when System 1 dominates. One is motivated reasoning. We evaluate new information by how well it supports identities we already hold. We don't start by asking what is true. We start by asking, does this fit my group? Another trap is the availability bias. Dramatic anecdotes or vivid headlines crowd out slower analyses of incidence and effect size. If you heard in your feed a single story of someone harmed by a program, it will weigh more heavily in System 1 than 10 dry studies showing net benefits. There's also identity protective cognition, the tendency to adopt beliefs that signal loyalty to your group. The Canadian data shows this. Identical solutions were accepted or rejected depending on which political tribe a respondent felt part of. That's not rational failure so much as social wiring. Humans are social animals. Belonging matters. But it also distorts judgment when the decision requires an evidence-first approach. So how do we tell when a response is System 1 and when System 2 is in play? Listen to the tempo and the emotion. If the answer comes with heat, moral language, quick metaphors, instant certainty, you're seeing System 1. If the answer comes with qualifiers, curiosity, questions about method or impact, System 2 is present. In practical terms for you, the moment you feel that rush of certainty, whether you're for or against a policy, a diet, a supplement, treat that rush as data, not a verdict. Notice it, name it. That's the doorway to open for slow thought. And just to put this out there and to remind everyone, there's no moral superiority in either system. System 1 preserves life, navigation, and social cohesion. System 2 brings rigor and nuance. The goal is not to kill our instincts, but to create a habit that when decisions matter, we need to pause long enough to let System 2 check in on System 1. We've talked about System 1 and System 2, the fast and slow lanes of thinking. But knowing they exist isn't the same as being able to switch between them. That's where discernment comes in. Centuries before we had neuroscience, Saint Ignatius of Loyola developed a practice to help people notice and interpret their inner reactions. It's called Ignatian Discernment, and it's surprisingly practical. The core idea is to pay attention to the movements inside you when you face a decision. It takes practice as well. Just always keep that in mind. Ignatius used 2 words to describe these movements: consolation and desolation. Consolation is that sense of clarity, peace, curiosity, or openness, even if the decision is hard. Desolation is the opposite: fear, rigidity, division, or an instinct to double down without reflection. I would use different words for me. I feel it more as, does my body expand towards something? So the same as consolation is what I would say. And does it pull back away from something, as in desolation? That's my spin on that. The point isn't to suppress the emotion though. It's to notice it, to treat those gut reactions as signals rather than verdicts. Let's go back to the sugar tax example from the Canadian study. Someone hears the government plans to tax sugary drinks and immediately feels annoyed. Maybe it sounds like punishment. Maybe it hits that don't tell me what to do nerve. That's a classic System 1 reaction. Fast, emotional, identity charged. Discernment invites a pause. Instead of running with that first feeling, you name it. I feel irritated. Why is that? You acknowledge the desolation, the defensiveness, the rigidity, whatever you want to call it. Then you engage System 2 by asking questions. What would this actually accomplish? What evidence is there? Who benefits? Who pays? It's not about changing your view on the tax. It's about making sure your view is formed deliberately, not just reflexively. Now let's make it more personal. Imagine you're scrolling through social media and see a video promoting a new fitness method. The person presenting is charismatic, clearly part of a group you identify with. Maybe they talk like you, dress like you, share your political leanings, or criticize the other side in a way that feels validating. Your System 1 lights up. You feel that rush of, yes, this is for people like me. Maybe you even start to imagine the results before you've looked at a single workout. Here's where Ignatian, I know I keep probably saying that differently, discernment changes the game. Instead of hitting sign up right away, you pause. You notice what's happening inside. Is this excitement rooted in real curiosity, a kind of consolation? Or is it coming from that identity hit, a desire to belong, a fear of missing out? And there's other questions you could ask as well too. These are just some examples. Then you bring in System 2. You start asking slower questions. What does the program actually involve? Is there evidence it works? Does it fit my goals and my life, or just my tribe? That small moment between feeling and action is where better decisions are made. and that's what we're aiming for. It's where fast thinking and identity stop hijacking your choices. Discernment doesn't make every decision easy. Sometimes both consolation and desolation show up together. But it gives you a way to move from automatic reactions to intentional choices, whether it's national policy or your daily routine. When we step back and look at everything together, the pattern is clear. A single national survey revealed something most of us sense but rarely see laid out so plainly. People can look at the same health problems and agree on what matters, but the moment solutions enter the conversation, identities take over. The divide isn't about the problem. It's about how our fast-thinking minds interpret solutions through the lens of who we believe we are and which side we belong to. System 1 reactions, those quick, emotionally charged responses, are not the enemy. They're part of being human. But when we let them run the show, especially in complex decisions, they narrow our vision. They make us certain before we're informed. System 2 is the counterweight. It slows us down, asks better questions, and tolerates the discomfort of uncertainty. It's the part of us that allows for nuance. And Ignatian Discernment bridges the two. It doesn't demand that we become robots or detach from emotion. It gives us a way to notice when identity is steering, name the feeling, and reflect before deciding. It's a pause button in a world that rarely gives us time to pause. When you put these pieces together, the takeaway is simple but powerful. Ideology plus System 1 thinking gives us predictable, polarized reactions. Discernment plus System 2 thinking allows for thoughtful, evidence-based choices. This isn't just about national policy. It shows up in our daily lives. The supplements we buy, the diets we try, the programs we follow, the headlines we believe. I can't even tell you the number of conversations I have about these things almost every day. A friend saying, "Hey, what do you think about this?" Every time a choice matters, there's an opportunity to pause, reflect, and make the decision yours rather than your group's. So here's my challenge to you. This week, when you feel that familiar rush of certainty, maybe from a headline, a post, a conversation, catch it. Take a breath and ask yourself, is this my fast brain talking? What would my slow brain say? That single moment of awareness is where clarity lives. It's a muscle you need to learn to flex as well. It's a mindset. It's where identity and ideology loosen their grip and genuine discernment steps in. If this video gave you something to think about, I'd love to hear it. Share your reflections or experiences in the comments, especially if you've ever caught yourself reacting fast to a health story before taking a closer look. This channel is where I dive deeper into topics that matter for real health and decision making. Sometimes that's how identity shapes our choices. Other times it might be something entirely different, like colostrum or mobility training. If you want to keep exploring these kinds of conversations with me, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. And if there's a topic you'd like me to unpack in a future video, let me know in the comments. See you next time.